Welcome, I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you are listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom, as we welcome today The Lost Voice, with John Studi and Jacob Nelson.
Welcome to The Lost Voice Radio, where we seek to recover the voice of wisdom, which spoke to Socrates 2,000 years ago and came incarnate in our Lord.
Allie's already laughing.
I can't even get the introduction with you here. Why did we invite you on board?
We have two guests today. Ms. Allie Abel, who I hope she's able to be up to the task of our show.
Well, at the very least, we won't have to use any canes because she is fully able-bodied. And if we did have a cane, I would generally fear for her life.
That's fair.
Yeah. And possibly for our lives as well, because that guy's not stable.
Right. Well, that's true. Allie, what do you do?
I am a middle school youth.
You got to be louder. You got to be louder.
I am a middle school youth minister at St. Alphonsus in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. I guess that's all.
Perfect. That's tremendous.
It is the most tremendous thing. And I will say that one thing that we often attribute to Allie is something that we can't really honestly tell you because it's almost impossible to prove contrary. It's one of those philosophical quandaries which began mostly with Descartes, although Aristotle did mention it about being in maybe reality is all a dream. And Descartes eventually did come up with this idea of the Cartesian demon.
Yes, Allie is the Cartesian
Allie
demon.
Is the Cartesian demon, which Aristotle just said was ridiculous and don't waste your time on it. But
wait, so Aristotle spoke against the Cartesian demon like 1,800 years before Descartes?
Yeah.
Huh.
I know, right?
So Aristotle's a time traveler.
Aristotle is a time traveler, in fact. That was one of the issues with the question on time in the physics is talking about motion. And most people think you can only move forward in time, but Aristotle thought that's ridiculous. Common sense tells us, because Aristotle is a philosopher of common sense, right? Aristotle tells us that common sense indicates to us we can both walk forward and backwards. And so in the same way, if time is about motion, and motion, then walking is a kind of motion, and time is a kind of motion. And you can go backwards and just walking, and you go back.
I'm having flashbacks to the first time we met and we argued about the nature of time, and I'm pretty sure what you just said is similar to what you were saying prior.
I'm sure it was. We could probably go back and check if we really needed to.
We recorded that?
It kind of depends what you mean by we.
You recorded that? Perfect. So our other guest today is Mr. Alex Marquette. Alex, tell us a little about yourself.
I am a recent graduate of small town Maple Lake High School, a small town in Minnesota, about an hour straight west of the Twin Cities. And I am attending the University of St. Thomas this fall, and I am going into the St. John Vianney Seminary to study philosophy and, God willing, 4 more years after that, theology, and to become a priest.
Fabulous. Thank you for your openness to holy orders and that wonderful vocation. I noticed, though, you didn't say anything about your fabulous youth minister in your high school years and middle school years, but that could be for a whole other episode. I'm sure you have hours of material you could speak on him.
You have no idea. Especially after the...
You're right, I have no idea.
The current youth minister.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comparisons that you can make.
Between myself and Balin?
Yeah.
So you're saying that a 28-year-old man with a full beard is similar to like a 22-year-old woman who just had a baby a few months ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are you under the influence of the Cartesian demon right now?
I understand that she is just several inches to my left, so there is a genuine possibility here.
Yeah, that's true.
But have you seen Whitley?
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen that little baby? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, you talk about the beard's equal manliness, but Whitley, that kid's manly.
He has the chub in the keg.
He's got the chub in the keg. He's basically got a youth ministry Bob.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Oh, boy.
His cheeks are so fat, they're longer than his nose, all right? There's something to that.
I kind of hope Balin does hear this so that she can be angry at you again.
Oh, she won't be angry with me.
She might be.
She probably is angry with me just because.
Well, shockingly, we're only at 4.5 minutes of obligatory nonsense.
Moose?
Yeah.
Should we describe Moose? That way it actually makes sense for the listeners to...
If you want to. You mean like listener? I'm pretty sure there's only like 2 people that listen to us
Hi,
anymore.
Lisa.
Hi, Justin. And maybe Dr. Mafood. Hello. Yeah.
Dr. Mafood, if you're hearing this, please indicate to us that you've heard our show. We would absolutely be astounded to have you among the listenership. Long story short, Jake and I, along with 2 other youth ministers,
Including Allie.
went on had a camp meeting at a restaurant up in what's that?
Buffalo.
In Buffalo.
El Mocajete.
El Mocajete. It's absolutely delicious. And Jake and I kind of got into this sophistical diatribe together, or rather, it was a motto tribe because what we.
And to be clear,
monologue. There we go.
you and I joined forces because we became one force at that point,
Yes,
and fought in a matter of fisticuffs
we did.
with other youth ministers.
Yeah, we were a veritable Batman and Robin, except that you put the 2 together because eventually
We were Rob Man,
we were Rob Man.
or we were Batten.
Well, we were batting like a 100 that day, so I mean,
You mean 1,000?
no 100.
Oh, 1 out of 10 pitches we got a hit?
Yes.
Okay.
10 out of 1 hit pitches.
Yeah.
We hit.
Do people even know what baseball is?
So I was playing baseball before you were born, so you can just calm down.
I probably played more state baseball tournaments than you did.
Yeah, probably.
All right. There might be something more than fisticuffs going on. If that's the case, I will begin recording and post it to the website so we can all partake in the glory of a certain kind of beatdown.
Fantastic.
Anyway, so Jake and I eventually said that we're the same person, and they said, no, you're not. And I said, prove it. And they said, we're seeing both of you right now. But I said, you never see both of us in the same place at the same time. And then they got kind of exasperated, as you can imagine. My normal ridiculousness would elicit in people. And then they said, yes, of course you are. You're right there. He's right there. I'm like, exactly. He's over there. I'm right here. You've never seen us in the exact same place, exact same time. He's taking up a different space-time area than I am. Come on. So clearly we're the same person. And eventually we started calling ourselves the Moose, which is me plus us, Moose, which rolled to Moose. And then Allie said something that was hard to refute, and so we accused her of being a Cartesian demon.
And that's actually where the Cartesian demon came. Yeah.
That's where the
All right.
Cartesian demon.
Well, we're up to 7 minutes now. I think we could probably move forward with the actual
I think
show
so, too.
and maybe contribute to humanity instead of detracting from it.
Well, here's the thing. We were doing this on purpose. I think this serves a greater end. That the one listener that we have must suffer so that the rest of the world may live. Which, of course, is a quotation from the high priest in the Gospels, who was talking about Jesus, right? They were thinking about, should we crucify this guy? Should we give him up to the Romans? And Caiaphas, speaking by the Holy Spirit, said exactly that. It is better that one man may die than the nation should perish. And so what we are talking about here today is suffering. And it's the suffering of Jesus Christ on the cross. And now, of course, when we think of Jesus' suffering, we look at this as a part of our redemption, a part of what came in to save us. And I think the clearest thing is you see a picture of Jesus on the cross, and anybody who looks at a crucifix will notice that this man is, at the very least, very, very uncomfortable. He's going through some intense suffering. His own torture was absolutely brutal.
Well, and crucifixes don't really show us the reality of the
They
crucifixion.
don't. No, they don't.
Do you want to get there now, or
I mean, I want to get there later.
okay? You keep going on your monotribe.
Monotribe.
Yeah.
Monodiatribe.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so the suffering we see on the cross, like Jake was saying, is actually really toned down. It doesn't normally show the whippings that Jesus had, the beatings from the sticks and the fists of the soldiers. He went through an immense amount of suffering, and some of it was the worst suffering you could possibly have. In fact, even the nails in his hands, or in his hands, the word in the Greek there is ambiguous, and it could be that it went through his wrist. In either case, where they have found examples of people who were crucified with pierced hands or wrists, they found that they put it through a particular place in the arm to actually pierce or put great pressure on the radial nerve. which is extraordinarily painful.
Right.
Enough to make somebody pass out in many situations. But these people, they couldn't pass out because if they did, they'd die when they're crucified and hanging up there. And even after the discouraging of the cat of nine tails, you see there's blood. I got to the point where certain passages in the Bible indicate to us that Jesus' organs themselves were exposed. This was incredible.
Right. The
suffering.
cat with nine tails was one handle, but it had 9 leather whips on it. At the end of each whip was either a rock, a nail, a fish hook, or a piece of glass.
Right.
And the rock would tenderize the flesh. The nails, the fish hooks, and the glass would dig in and tear it off.
Right. And what's part of the difficulty that he had, though, too, is that he had this beating on his back, beating all over his body, so his muscles are weak. He's got tons of blood loss. He has an absolutely tender and raw back. And then the way that he had to push himself up to breathe would be to press against the nail in his feet
Right.
and scrape his back up against the cross. This was incredible suffering, and it did not stop. But there's more to Christ's suffering than physical suffering, which is something we talk about all the time.
Mhm.
And when we ask about why is it that Christ suffered, I want to first of all look here at the physical sufferings. When we sin, there are typically 2 kinds of sins that I like to divide things into. You have the sins of the flesh and then sins of the spirit. Now, this is a division some people have made, and I think it's a very useful way of thinking about it. And when it comes to Christ's actions, his body certainly worked against and counteracted the sins of the flesh. Because the sins of the flesh so often are those things which give us pleasure, those things which feel good. It was a discipline, in the sense of his own body, to undergo all those incredible sufferings on his flesh. And what that did for us was it offered up, and we talked about this last time, that infinite sacrifice on behalf of mankind, laying down the body, which so often is put out of order, for the sake of all people, and showing God that this is something that Jesus, as the new man, is willing to lay down and offer to the Father. But there's, of course, much more to it than that. The suffering. And Jake, you were going to say something about that too?
Was I?
You said so. The crucifixes don't show his suffering. What did you mean by that?
Oh, that the crucifix we have don't show the reality of how much he endured. So I think we already covered that.
Oh, we did? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go a different direction with that one.
No.
Okay. All right.
No, you're under the influence of the Cartesian demon again. You're very susceptible.
I am. Well, I've been missing out on a lot of sleep, which
That's
has
fair.
borne me incredible suffering.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the beautiful things about the cross. One of the more difficult aspects of apologetics is the problem of evil.
Well, and so I think that's something that we should take some time talking on, and then maybe you and I can rest the glorious vocal chords that we have, and Allie and Alex can take over for a few minutes, so that the tremendous timbre of our tonal voices can rest.
Tonal voices.
Tonal. That's what I said.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Tonal voices. In timbre. I like timbre too.
Yeah.
That's good.
I like alliteration. It's fantastic. About suffering, one of the obviously common things within apologetics, but even in our own faith, I think, is doubt that stems from a good God allowing suffering and evil. That somehow we equate suffering with being out of favor with God, which is more of an Old Testament equation. That if you suffer, it's because you offended God somehow, and God is punishing you. And that's not really the way the New Testament goes about talking about suffering. Jesus didn't talk about suffering that way. The apostles didn't talk about suffering that way. And yet, for so many people, even Christians today, we think that suffering is somehow a punishment given by God. Right. And that's simply not the case. So, I don't know if maybe Allie or Alex want to talk about suffering specifically in terms of the theology of it, but maybe in a more personalistic way, because Studi, you and I are just, I don't know. We're too guarded.
Detached from humanity.
Yeah. We're detached from humanity.
Absolutely.
Maybe Alex and Allie can offer their own perspectives a little bit on the nature of suffering.
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. Alex, number one. All right.
So,
suffering, dealing with his youth minister. Me.
no, this is not suffering. This is a blessing.
All right.
But anyway, suffering, there's so many people that do ask the question, why do people suffer? in this world if we have a good God. And there's a book by Father Brannan called To Save a Thousand Souls, and it puts it into perspective. And it uses the example of how God lets people continue to sin in the same sin over and over again while they're still pleading for his help. It's because if he stopped that sin, if he stopped the people from sinning, then they would have no need to turn back to him. And so he allows people to continue on and over in the same sin so they will keep coming to him, and eventually it's like stacking on piles of grace each time they turn in prayer, and then they'll have the strength to overcome that sin. But then they'll also have formed the habit of praying to God every day. Stu, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think that you bring up something interesting there in saying that God allows people to continue in their own sin. Now, I think that it's good for us to make sure that we have the distinction there that God isn't desiring them to stay in sin for the sake of, that they come back to Him. That might be kind of tough.
Right.
But I think it's the idea of why am I continuing to fall into this sin? Well, I think that what you would be encountering there is if somebody does have a habitual sin that they keep coming back to, is that there's an underlying sin that person's not quite aware of yet. And what they need, like you're saying, is to continually rely on God's grace and to keep coming back to Him. And so this sin is something that God is allowing in the sense of this is a necessary step in order for this person's redemption. I'm going to give them the grace to say no to this sin. Of course, God always gives us sufficient grace to overcome anything that we might be struggling with. But his point there is he's teaching them that you have this flaw, this difficulty, this weakness that you're not recognizing. And here's a fruit of it. And here's the fruit of that fruit. Here's that fruit of that fruit. And by continually going back to that sin and seeing it over and over and over again and relying on God's grace, a person who keeps begging and leaning on God's mercy will eventually be led to that greater need for God and understanding that they are weak and powerless without Him to overcome, first of all, this habitual sin they might have that's more on the surface level, but most especially the deeper sin which they don't understand. So it's very interesting. To save a soul, you said?
To Save a Thousand Souls.
1,000 souls, okay. Heard of that book.
It's a very good book.
Yeah.
Very good book.
I also think that it brings up an interesting point about the natural punishment due to sin. So Jake was talking about how the New Testament doesn't necessarily say that sin is always a punishment for an individual person having sin. But sin itself does come with its own consequences. I think an obvious example of this would be if I were to cheat on my wife and get somebody pregnant. My wife and I would get together and I'd say, honey, I'm very sorry. I love you, etc. And then we would.
Would you include the word etc. in there?
It would be the most redeeming quality of the apology. It doesn't that much. Most articulate part of it anyway. Anyway, so we could actually reconcile our relationship. My wife and I could be restored, and maybe even stronger than we were before. However, there's still the fact of the matter that there's another child and another family that I've begun that I need to take care of somehow, that I need to be involved with.
Right.
And that's going to bring about suffering on my part. And it's going to be something that brings me forward in the rest of my life. I'm going to have to take care of these two families, but also it will help me ultimately become a greater person, because the bigger issue with that committing adultery is that I was seeking my own self-satisfaction rather than seeking the good of the other, especially my own family, my wife, and the person who I would have been cheating with in that situation. And so having to have that constant reminder and that constant task or duty to take care of both families is going to make me a much more self-sacrificial person.
Well, and I think even in the New Testament, isn't it St. Paul, he says the wages of sin is death.
Yeah.
And, he's not saying, well, because you sin, God is going to kill you. Mm-hmm. But that from sin, there's a natural consequence of death, because when we sin, every sin is a separation from our own human nature, because it's part of human nature to have an intellect, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all agree?
Yes.
Cartesian demon, do you agree? They can't hear nods on the radio. Thank you. Great. All right. Can't hear nods on the radio. Trust me, Studi and I tried an entire hour of just hand gestures. That show was awful. But it's part of human nature to have an intellect. And it's reasonable for man to orient himself towards God because we're made for him. But when we act opposed to God's law, we're acting in opposition to reason. We're acting in opposition to intellect. Therefore, every sin, since it offends God, actually is an action that separates us from our own very human nature, right? Mm-hmm. So we also understand then that since we have an intellect, we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God is the intellect, he is wisdom itself. When we separate ourselves from that, we're also separating ourselves from he who gives life. And so the natural consequence of sin is that since we're separating ourselves from God and we're separating ourselves from our own human nature, which is destined for eternity, we are naturally going to receive death as a punishment. Not that God himself is doing the punishing, but that it's the wages of our own sin. It's a natural consequence of our sin.
Yeah, this brings me to one of my favorite distinctions, and it brings us right back to the question across here, is Alistair McIntyre and a number of other authors, but I get it through mostly Alistair McIntyre, makes a distinction between freedom for and freedom from.
Yes.
Freedom for excellence, and I absolutely love this distinction. When we sin, something that we're doing on the objective level is, in both the Hebrew and the Greek, the word for sin is to miss the mark. And like Jake was saying, when we sin, when we choose to do something that's contrary to God's law, we're also doing something that's contrary to our own nature. We're doing something that is actually lowering ourselves to the nature of like an animal, because most of the time, again, it's the sins of the flesh. We chase after our own pleasures, those things that are really big and flashy that we really want right now, and we go get it. And we don't think ahead of time, reflect on our actions, and choose carefully according to what the truth of the world, the truth of ourselves, and the truth of God's revelation is for us. But rather, we act on that impulse, which is what animals do. And that lowers us. It brings us to slavery, is the way I think about that. Because if you have somebody who is willingly putting themselves in chains, which somebody who sins, that's exactly what they're doing. They're making their nature, they're making their disposition weaker, they're distorting their desires, they're making it harder for them to choose the right thing. And we make ourselves slaves intentionally. But what are we really trying to do? Well, it's the freedom of indifference. Mm-hmm. We are trying to have that radical freedom for me to choose for myself what is right and what is wrong. It's an age-old question of what happened at the tree, knowledge of good and evil, where Adam reached out and grasped.
Yeah, and I think the traditional idea of freedom is important here because I really like the distinction of freedom from and freedom for. But the freedom from God isn't really getting to the heart of what freedom is, which is to do what one ought to do. The other thing I think to keep in mind, too, is that humans have rational life. We have rational souls, but we also have sensitive souls, meaning that we have our senses. We have sight, we have hearing, we have touch, we have taste, we have smell. I got all five, right? Fabulous. All right. So we have sensitive life as well, but every animal has sensitive life. What makes an animal and not a tree is that it has sensation and locomotion, but that's another part of it. So if we negate our intellectual life or our rational life, all that's left is the animal aspect of us. And so when we sin, we're actually ceasing to act as humans, and we're receiving or accepting just what makes us animals. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, even though we have greater dignity than, say, a dog or a cat, or, well, everybody has greater dignity than a cat, but greater dignity than a dolphin, whatever else, we are not recognizing that in ourselves, and we lower ourselves to the level of mere animalistic appetites. Yes. And that's obviously a horrible thing for man to do. But the reason why sin is so easy is because, as I think it was Aristotle, Studi, you're the philosopher in this relationship, you're my handmaiden, that it was Aristotle that said there's no intellect in the mind that doesn't first begin in the senses. And because the senses come first, and they're the most real to man, because they're so tangible. And it's only the intellection that comes later, because the intellect is informed by the senses. But for so many people, we get to the sensation and we stop.
Yep.
We never get to the intellection. And so we're cutting ourselves off from the height of humanity and leaving ourselves at merely what makes us animals.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going for.
Moose!
At some point, moose. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go on the other side. Everybody desires to be happy. Alex, you desire to be happy, right? Allie, you want to be happy. Oh, that's good answer.
Good. Yay!
Yay.
She didn't nod. She's learning.
Yeah, you're great. Allie. You're doing fantastic. But if we want to live a happy life, we can't live the happy life of a pig. Plato talks about this in his book, The Republic. They start constructing this life, this town. They've got people who are going to make food. They've got people who are going to be farmers. They've got people who are going to make shoes and all sorts of other things. And then one of Plato's dialogue partners says, "Well, that's certainly a happy world for a pig." Well, then what do you have after that? Well, then he starts adding these pleasures of human life. They start talking about like education and knowledge and philosophy's wisdom and all that kind of stuff. And so there's something about man that makes us different from animals. And if we're going to have a happy life, we need to have a happy life suited for a man, not a tree being planted in the ground and have somebody pour water on me and throw fertilizer on me is not going to make me happy, Jake.
Sorry.
What's going to make me happy is, of course, having my body taken care of, food, water, other drink, and then having relationships, and then contemplating, most of all, the divine goodness. Those are the things that are going to make me happy, especially if I'm allowing those things to penetrate deeply into my being, my person, so that way I can become not only someone who actively receives love from others, who can receive God's love, but also give it out. So it's something that comes forth from me. So I can be a virtuous person. And that is going to be the key to happiness, and it has to be human. So it has to be, as Jake was saying, something that is rational, but there also has to be the aspect of making sure that my body is taken care of as well. And that's what's ultimately going to give us freedom, which is one of the reasons why I think that this question of freedom and suffering and sin applies directly to the cross, because Christ came to free us from our sins, right?
Yes.
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 Hallelujah. Truthfully, though, hallelujah. That's great. Side note, Michael story, obligatory Michael story. After
Fabulous.
Easter, Michael was walking out of the church shouting, "Hallelujah! Hallelujah!" It was adorable because we were all shouting at the end. It was fantastic. Anyway, so Adam and Eve, they flipped humanity upside down in many ways, because they were supposed to. An original man had an intellect way up high in his head, which it still is more or less. They had the will, which is the heart, that was above, which was below the head, and then you had the passions, the stomach. And so the original man was like a man standing on his feet, if you understand what I'm saying here. So the intellect knew the truth, the will chose the truth easily, and the passions helped guide and direct man towards that truth. And choose that way. See where I'm going with this, Jake?
I do. Allie was staring at me weird, though.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh,
Yeah.
She was looking really bad.
I think she was trying to be like a Cartesian demon and influence me in some way.
You gotta move on the other side of the table. I think Alex is blocking your Cartesian demon. Anyway, so man originally was standing upright, but then when he decided to rebel against God, what he did is he flipped moral order upside down by choosing to reach out to take the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which, long story short, means that they were saying, "I choose for myself what's right."
Right, they dictated what the moral law was.
Yeah, they dictated moral laws, so that flipped the whole moral order upside down. So the fitting punishment was what? They get flipped upside down. So now man is like somebody standing on their hands, where we can still operate, sort of. You can't see very far, so you're not going to really know where you're going. Your heart's having a hard time pumping blood everywhere, so your will's going to be a little weaker. You're not going to be able to get there very quickly, even when you do know where you need to go. And your stomach, especially if you've got a good youth minister bod, is going to be making you fall over all the time. And so it's exactly the situation we find ourselves in right now.
As a side note, the whole youth minister bod thing is that youth ministers often have a diet mainly of pizza and pop, so they tend to grow as
laterally.
Yeah.
They grow laterally.
Yeah. We need to keep moving on the creed, though, because we only have 1 week left after
I'll
this.
make
So,
it very quick. And so
okay.
what Jesus did is the exact opposite, and it comes right back to this Philippians 2:5 through 11 verse that I keep on talking about. It said, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, considered equality with God not something to be grasped or exploited, which evokes the image of Adam grasping the tree, but rather emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And so while our sinfulness led us to slavery, Christ's kenosis, or self-emptying as God, humbling himself for us and becoming a slave, is what set us free. He gave us the freedom to live as he desires us to live as virtuous humans, but even beyond that, have the freedom that goes beyond that, and even into partaking in the very divine nature, divine love that's within the Trinity. So Christ's cross itself is what set us free because of the action that it undid.
yeah, so I think we pretty well covered Jesus suffering under Pontius Pilate as Studi runs around the room now. It's fantastic. We covered suffering under Pontius Pilate. He was crucified, died, and was buried. I think the next line confuses people. Studi, that is sacramental wine. You cannot drink that. The next line, I think people get a little apprehensive about, or they don't really think about it. But he descended into hell. And, Allie, if you're at Mass, you're praying the creed, he descended into hell. What are you thinking? I mean, when you pray that prayer, what comes to mind?
What comes to mind is because he actually going down to hell. That's why would he go down instead of up? I mean,
You got to say that again. I'm turning your mic up.
what comes to mind is he has risen. He's supposed to. He opened the gates of heaven and descending into hell. Do they mean that, like literally into hell, where Satan is?
Fascinating question.
Alex, what do you think?
Future seminarian, get us on the right track.
I honestly don't know the answer to this question, but
Humility is a good mark of a seminarian.
usually when I think of this part, I'm always reminded that even the people suffering in hell, there's still part of the love of God within them, because without the love of God, they could not exist in hell.
And that's part of their suffering,
And-
that they're still loved, and the love burns.
Yes.
Have you ever been with somebody
It's-
you really don't like hanging out with?
Oh,
You just have to be with them?
every time I do the radio show. Myself, I'm talking about.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
good. I thought for a second it was going to be our listening audience, because I love our listening
No, I do too.
audience. They're
The three of them we have.
I'm pretty, okay, side note, we're just making fun of ourselves.
Yeah,
so
we
have
are.
more than two listeners.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to the show the first time, no, we're not that unpopular, at least on the radio. I'm not sure if anybody else likes us in our personal lives, but hold on, we were going somewhere with that, weren't we?
All right.
Oh, right, yeah.
We're back to
Personal
where
sins, yeah.
where that the love of God is still present in every person, even if they're in hell.
Mhm.
And that is also the reason why the greatest suffering in hell is not the pain, not the any of the physical, what we would think of as suffering. It's that you have realized that there is no hope of you being united with God. That is why hell is so undoing to so many people that are there.
Well, C.S. Lewis in a great book, The Great Divorce, talks about those in hell. It's like,
Mhm.
no, that's the case. They can't be up there. But there's this, it's a story. It's a long, I'm in a very, very quick parable here. There was a fox who wanted some grapes that was in a tree, and he couldn't get them, all right? Just chill. Don't make fun of me right yet.
Yeah, stop making fun of Studi. That's
Yeah.
my job as his
Yeah, come
co-host.
on, you guys. We're trying to usurp Jake's position here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a fox saw some grapes in the tree, but he couldn't get them. And there was a crow up there who was eating the grapes, and the crow was saying that the grapes were delicious and loved them. They were the best grapes he's ever had. But the fox couldn't get them, and the crow knew that if he brought the grapes down to the fox, that the fox would eat the crow. And so the crow absolutely refused to give him the grapes, no matter what the fox said.
What does the fox say?
I said that like a breed. I was coming. Anywho, so the fox turned away and said, the probably sour grapes anyway, walked off in his misery with no grapes and hating both the crow and the grapes. I think it's the same way with people in hell. This is sort of what C.S. Lewis talks about, is that they know that they're not going to ever enjoy the bliss of heaven. But what they do is they turn back around and say, well, I would want anyway. How boring is that? Gaze the eternal bliss of God for all of eternity. Come on, there's better things to do. So they're deceiving themselves. Liars to the end.
I think that's actually more applicable to people on Earth.
Also true.
You know, that we understand that living a Christian life is difficult. We say, well, geez, heaven's going to be boring. And I've heard it said before, I would rather party with people in hell than be bored with people in heaven. Well, how stupid is that? My goodness. I kind of want to do a theological will of destruction on that one line, but I don't know if there's really a whole lot to go on with that, so we'll skip it for now. But, Studi just laughed. Yeah, in hell, part of the suffering is that God's love is present insofar as that place exists. And God's presence is part of the great suffering of these souls who have utterly rejected God. But specifically, in the lion, he descended into hell, there are two different words for hell in the New Testament. One is Sheol, which is more like Hades. The Greek idea of Hades, kind of the resting place. We also call it Abraham's bosom. It's the resting place for the just prior to the gates of heaven being opened. And then there's Gehenna, which is the fires of hell, where Satan and all his minions reside. And from my understanding, reading some Thomas and doing some theological studies, is that Christ descended into Sheol, or Hades, not into Gehenna. He went to ransom those just souls who were waiting for the Savior in order to enter heaven, because they had lived their life in such a manner that they would receive Christ when he came. And when Christ came, he ransomed those souls and brought them to heaven, but the souls lost to Gehenna forever still retained no hope. Studi, am I right?
Yeah.
All right.
You're really right. There's a third word, though, in the Greek. It's called Tartarus.
Yeah, that one too, I know. But
Oh, yeah. That's more like the if you remember your Greek legends or whatever.
Mhm.
So the Greek gods were the Titans, and then the Titans were locked down in the
yeah.
Tartarus. So, and then, no, you're right. Yeah, it's a deep pit and whatnot. And Paul talks about how humanity, those who sin and fall away from God, will also be sent there. But the thing is that it was not made for man; it was made for the devil and his angels.
Mm.
And that's really the separation from God.
Yeah.
So we align ourselves with the rebellion in heaven.
And this is not a good rebellion like in Star Wars.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
There will be no exploding of Death Stars or lightsaber duels, which is terribly disappointing.
But will we get lightsaber duels in heaven for fun?
Hey, that's the thing. Heaven,
practice
you
war
guys,
with angels.
really is all about whatever fun thing we enjoy. After all,
Is that really what it's all about? Or
You're
fun
sounding
earthly
very-
things?
Very, very. The pleasures of the flesh. you said.
pleasures of the flesh.
That's very
All
Epicurious of
heaven
you.
is-
That's
all
very
heaven is
Mohammedan
about.
of you.
It's just, okay. Heaven is about the same thing that My Little Teapot is about.
My little
Teapot, short and stout.
teapot,
Teapot,
short and stout.
Here's my head is about to
Yeah.
turn myself around and form me out. That's what it's all about.
Oh.
Is that what we're talking about?
I don't think so.
Oh, I
You
didn't
forgot the
think
part about getting steamed up.
so. Oh, yeah, you steamed up. Yeah, yeah.
But
Pretty sure the
you're
steaming
already
up is in
steamed
hell.
up.
The steamed up is in hell, and that's what it's all about.
Hell is what it's all about?
No.
Wait, so if I've already attained heaven, can I live like hell? Or is that too Calvinistic
How
for you?
German are you?
I'm not very German. I'm mostly Italian.
So I was having a conversation with somebody about.
That's
their-
fantastic, Studi. I'm so happy for
I'm getting
you.
out of the house and talking to people now. But they were criticizing the Roman Church. They're Eastern Orthodox, and they were saying, you guys said we'd have all sorts of divisions and heresies and stuff, and they do have issues, mind you, but they didn't have problems.
Studi, you got to speak up. You're not near the mic.
I'm sorry. I'm used to it being right in front of me. But so they were criticizing the Catholic Church for having schisms and whatnot. And then my joke to them was, well, you guys didn't have to deal with the Germans. Come on. Cut us some slack.
That's terrible. You're bad.
But I love the Germans. I'm
You are
German.
German.
I am German. That's what I'm saying. I know
Stute.
my own people.
Stute, you're a mare.
I
You're
am.
a female horse.
Hey, I don't tell people. That's my secret, all right?
Okay, I won't
Anyway.
tell anybody either.
So, but you're let's go. Let's go back and talk about this concept of Sheol, or talk about the descent into hell. I think that this is something that was really shocking to me as a Protestant to find out, especially in 1 Peter 3, 3, where it says that, let me see here. And here we go. For it is better to suffer for Christ also, this is 3:18. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, was saved through water. Then it goes on to talk about how baptism now saves you, which was also shocking as a Protestant. But it was interesting to see Jesus go and preach to the spirits in prison. Goes preach to those who were in that realm of the dead. And now it would have been absolutely superfluous and a waste of his time, so to speak, for him to go preach to people who were in hell. And it also would have been superfluous for him to go preach to people in heaven. Because those who are in hell, no amount of preaching is going to save them. They're not going to turn. But those who are in heaven, they don't need to be turned. There's no need for their repentance. And so it seems that there's a third state. And this for me was an absolute shock, because it sounded to me to be something akin to purgatory, where they were waiting for the coming of the Son of God to release them from this prison, from this period of waiting for the gates of heaven to be open to all mankind. And for me, that was a very difficult passage to try to reconcile with my own former evangelical beliefs. But this is what Christ did. He came and he set the captives free, yes, here on earth, and for all mankind in the future, but he also set those who did not obey perfectly, is what I'm assuming here, set them free from their waiting period they had in order to enter into that list of the Father, which is what they were looking forward to.
Sorry, I got distracted a little bit from...
I noticed. I was wondering what you're doing.
Oh, man. I'm in the middle of reading...
Are you looking at the existential comics again?
No, though
No
there are
existential comics.
There are some really funny existential comics. Right. No, I came across an article. We might have to take this apart.
Okay.
A little bit.
Okay.
I wonder... We should record, 15 minutes on this article and just have an extra post on the website, I think, because it's an article out of the Catholic Herald, which is from the UK, by Matthew Walther. And from gathering so far, he's saying that marriage prep and baptism courses are a waste of time. And they shouldn't be done. I have things to say.
I have things to say, too.
I hope he hears it. I don't know how he would hear what I have to say, but anyway, maybe we'll do this later.
So he descended into hell.
Yes. Sorry, Studi.
Fantastic. All right. So he just
Allie, the Cartesian demon has something to say.
Cartesian demon, go for it.
So from 1960s, I think it was the 1880s, from the 1960s, Baltimore Catechism was the standard Catholic text for religion class.
Yep.
The word they used for when we refer to he descended into hell, they referred to that as limbo.
That is not accurate.
No, it's actually not.
So,
which is another interesting question.
Can I take care of this?
Go ahead.
All right. So, when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they had a perfectly natural state of happiness. So, they were happy according to their nature. So, whatever it meant for Adam and Eve, perfectly sinless, no corruption of body or soul, they were fully happy. They had full beatitude with God, according to their nature. They sinned. Now that natural happiness is gone, and God's response is you will attain a supernatural happiness. So a happiness that is above your nature. You cannot earn it. There's nothing you can do to earn it or deserve it. It's a gift that I'm freely going to give. And that happiness that is above your nature is to see God face to face as he is, which is not proper to any creature ever for all eternity. Because to see God as he is proper to God alone. So the idea of limbo, it's not a doctrine, it's not an official teaching of the church, it's merely something that is posited and out there. You can believe it if you want, you don't have to believe it, either way is fine. So we know heaven is the final resting place, supernatural happiness, It's all good. We know hell is the final resting place, which is supreme suffering. We know purgatory is in existence, and it's a transitional state to purify the soul to enter into heaven. The idea of limbo, though, is, I don't know if it was first posited by St. Thomas, but I know St. Thomas defended it. Stu, do you know who first posited the idea?
It was one of the church fathers.
Okay.
Because St. Augustine talked about it too.
Okay. St. Thomas defends it, but again, it's not an official teaching either way. But ultimately, what limbo is all about is it's a fulfillment of a perfectly natural state of happiness for a soul. And so what it's commonly applied to would be babies or children who have not yet reached the age of reason, so they could not go to hell because they're not at the age of reason, so they couldn't have personal sin, but they haven't yet been baptized, and so they can't enter into the gates of heaven because we know that the only way to heaven is through baptism. And so trying to understand what would happen to these souls was the idea of limbo. They couldn't get the supernatural happiness, but they could attain the natural happiness. And so they wouldn't be suffering in any way. They wouldn't be lacking in any way because they'd be totally happy according to their human nature. And so that's the idea of limbo. That's not where Christ went. That's a different thing. Again, the idea of limbo, we don't have to believe. We can believe, say, for mothers, and I think especially mothers who have gone through miscarriages or things like that, we have reason to believe in God's great mercy that those children would be in heaven in their supernatural state of happiness, not only their natural state, thus limbo. But even if the children were in limbo, they would be totally and utterly happy in every possible way. There'd be no suffering. But it's a hard thing for people to grasp the idea of the difference between heaven and limbo, because limbo sounds bad and it's got negative connotations and all of that. So anyway, that's kind of a general idea of limbo. It's not an official doctrine of the church. You can believe it or not believe it, whatever you want. Totally fine.
One of the reasons why limbo has some negative connotations is evidently in the Middle Ages. One of the reasons why limbo has some negative connotations is because in the Middle Ages, evidently, there was the idea that limbo was sort of the kind of like upstate neighborhood of hell. And so it was outside the gates of hell, but it was pretty close to it.
Right.
Whereas purgatory was something that was just kind of like the waiting room of heaven.
Yeah.
And so there was a connection to the idea of limbo being nearer to hell than it would be to heaven.
Right.
Which is true. I mean, if you're in your natural state and you're completely blissful in your natural state, then you're closer to hell than heaven, I guess, in a way. God's still present to you, but you're not rejecting him. Than you are in purgatory, because purgatory, you're on your way, you're approaching God. You're moving towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually attaining something higher than your own natural happiness, which is interesting.
But I don't know if I would say that
Me either.
hell is... I don't think limbo is closer to hell than it is to heaven, because there is no suffering in limbo.
That's true.
That would be like saying Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were closer to hell than they were to God when they walked with God.
So the question would be then, because heaven, in terms of what, there's really a...
I mean, in one sense, you're right, because there's an infinite gap between...
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I would say I wouldn't put it in terms of closer to hell than to heaven. Because,
Right. I don't think I would ultimately either.
So you're going to walk back your statement?
No, I was thinking aloud. It wasn't a statement. It was a thinking out loud question, pondering this idea of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
So,
in any case, if anybody wants to believe in limbo, you're totally and utterly free to do so. And it's just a natural state of happiness. But we have reason to believe for, miscarried babies, especially, I think, or aborted babies, especially, that they would be welcome into the arms of heaven. That's not officially taught, but you're welcome to believe that as well.
Sure.
Because it's not untaught, or it's not taught against. So you're welcome to believe that as well. There's something else on that matter I was going to...
on hell or limbo?
I don't remember.
Oh, well, all right.
Whatever was in my mind totally slipped my mind. It was probably really profound, and the Cartesian demon wanted to be gone. So now
Come on, Allie. What are you doing?
So, descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. Well, he died on a Friday at 3 p.m. and then we celebrate Easter Saturday night. That's not 3 days. Studi.
Hey, what are you looking at me for?
I
All
don't
right.
know.
Long story short.
I don't know. I like putting you in boxes.
That's fine. I can be in a box. You can maybe send me somewhere for vacation. I can't afford a plane ticket,
All right.
so that'd be great, actually.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Somewhere local. Not too far.
Sheol.
I guess that's local. You crazy? Okay. Long story short, within the Jewish reckoning of time, any part of a day is considered a full day, and Jesus was crucified on a Friday, died around 3 p.m. And so he went into the tomb on Friday before sundown, which is going to count as Friday day.
Mm-hmm.
But then he spent Saturday in the tomb, which would have been Saturday day as well. However, the women found him in the tomb on Sunday morning, and we don't have a whole lot of...
They did not find him
They
in the
found
tomb
the tomb
Sunday
empty.
morning.
Oh, sorry. Found him outside.
Scandal of Christianity. They actually found him.
Sorry, they found the tomb empty on Sunday morning. What I meant to say is they did not go to him on Saturday night.
Right.
They found the tomb empty on Sunday morning. They couldn't have done it Saturday night either because it was part of the Sabbath. And so when the sun rose on the 7th day, or on the 8th day, really, Sunday, which would have been the 3rd day after his crucifixion, he would have been counted as being in the tomb on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and so
Right.
it would have been counted as 3 days.
And the Sabbath for us, of course, is Sunday. It's not really called the Sabbath for Christians, I don't think. It's Jewish connotation.
Yes.
But
It's the Lord's Day for Christians.
right, it's the Lord's Day. It's Easter. Every Sunday's an Easter because we celebrate the resurrection. But I think one of the beautiful things about celebrating Easter Vigil on Saturday night, and Christ, of course, rose from the dead somewhere between sundown Saturday and sunup Sunday. But there's this beautiful bridge of the 3 days from the Old Covenant Sabbath Saturday to the New Covenant Lord's Day Sunday. Christ bridges that gap to show the continuity of faith, that we're born not out of our own wills, but we're born out of what he had already prepared in Israel for thousands of years.
Yeah, there's a particular beauty to the idea of it being between sundown Saturday and then sunup Sunday. And there's two things with that. One, it signals a new creation because it goes from the last day, and the new creation, Sunday, which is the first day of the week, is when God did what? Well, he said, let there be light. And he separated the light from the darkness. And now what's interesting is in the Genesis narrative, Genesis 1, when it talks about the different days, it says, and God did this and this and this. It was evening, and then it was day, the first day. And now what's interesting there, it goes from evening to day, evening to morning, evening to morning. And what's happening is it's moving from darkness and into light. And this is what Christ has done for us on the cross, and especially with his resurrection, is that he has moved us out of the darkness and death of our own sin and from the fallen state of creation. And he's moving us away from that darkness, that pit of despair, and now moving us forward into the new light and life, which is a life of resurrection as united to the Son of God. And so I think that this question of when did Christ rise from the dead, how long was he in the tomb, and why is it that the Jewish calendar, the Jewish day, that way of reckoning days, why was it the way that it was? Because God was writing into history, into the traditions and the culture of the people, an anticipation of what he would do for all of humanity and all of the world. And now the Sunday resurrection celebration, the Lord's Day, I think is also a bit of evidence for us that Christ really was raised from the dead. Or at the very least, if we want to be really agnostic or apprehensive about it, something extraordinary happened on that Sunday that the disciples were absolutely profoundly struck by. Because what we see very quickly in the New Testament and in the early church is that Christians stopped celebrating the Lord's Day on Saturday. They stopped going to temple. And even while they were still going to temple, they still celebrated on Sundays. But very quickly, the day for gathering, the day for prayer, the day for the breaking of the bread was not going to be Saturday. And these, for Jews, that's incredible. That's one of the that's breaking into the Ten Commandments, right?
Right.
Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. But the Sabbath, the command to keep the Sabbath was transitioned in the New Covenant to the Lord's Day because it signified the new creation, the new day of not just rest, but
I believe in the prophet Isaiah, he speaks of the 8th day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember where, but he talks about the 8th day.
Not nearly as good as my prophets as I ought to be. You got me. I had a class on the prophets, but that was a year ago.
Do you want to get into the next line? We have about 5 minutes left, but
Sure, we got.
he will come to judge the living and the dead, and I'll look up the 8th day in Isaiah.
It's Isaiah 10. It's a long thing, actually.
Great. I'll look into it.
Okay.
You go into judgment. Judge me. Judge Elliot. Judge everybody.
I am judging everybody. So Jesus said in the Bible, judge not. And that's all we really need to know from that passage. Okay?
Exactly. Judge not.
Judge not. It has nothing to do with judge not, lest you be...
what kind of knots do you like best? Slip knots?
I do like slip
He likes
knots.
noose.
Noose
Noose.
knots.
Noose. We talked about this earlier. Noose. Noose knots, your style of the mind, and nooses or something, a nuisance. No, with judgment, with Christ's judgment, I think that we will look at this in a few different ways. When in Matthew, Jesus is talking about the final judgment, about people coming before him. He is not going to be looking for any distinguishing nationalistic markers. And now for the Jews, this was kind of an astonishing thing, because what the prophets had been talking about for thousands of years was the vindication of Israel. Israel had been walloped by the pagan nations, had been taken over by them, and that God, in his judgment, was going to come down and strike the pagan nations and exalt Israel to an earthly, beautiful kingdom, and that the people of Israel would be brought up and shown to be the chosen people of God. And now when Jesus talks about judgment in Matthew 25, his answer to the question of who is going to partake in the new kingdom, who's going to partake in the Father's blessing, isn't Israel, per se. It's not those who are a part of the family of Abraham physically. Rather, what he says to them is, to those, he'll gather all nations, so all nations here, and so this refers to all peoples, and he'll separate them from the sheep from the goats, so there's going to be those who are clean for sacrifice, those who are clean and those who are not clean here, and he will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left, and then he'll say, then the king, Jesus will say, to those at his right hand, "Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you." And then later it says, those he'll say to his left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." And then what is the criteria here? "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was strange, and you welcomed me." A little later down it says, "I was hungry, and you gave me no food. Thirsty, you gave me no drink. Stranger, you did not welcome me." What's fascinating here is if you look through the prophets, talking about Isaiah, look through the prophets, there were two reasons why, primarily, Israel was sent into exile. First, they were not worshiping the Lord alone. They had fallen into pagan idolatry. Secondly, they were not treating their neighbors well. They were violating social justice in a real sense. I think the prophet Ezekiel talks about how you sell your neighbor, who was made in the image and likeness of God, for a pair of sandals. You have no understanding of the value of that human person. And so what Jesus is saying here, and he's speaking to people who are Jews, they understand why they were sent into exile, is that one of the criteria that he is going to be looking for, and in fact it's among the greatest criteria, is the question of, are you doing exactly what your forefathers did that sent them into exile? If you're not, then welcome to the kingdom, because you've discovered what the kingdom is, love of God, love of neighbor. And if you are, then you will supposed to go to exile.
So next week we need to talk more about judgment because it's a big topic. But we're out of time. So,
I'm sorry.
does Allie have anything to say? Does Alex have anything to say? Alex has things to say. You have like 7 seconds.
Okay. Just back to earlier in the show when we were talking about why Christ did everything that he did on the cross. A good friend of mine over this past weekend told me that it's important to remember that Christ did not do what he did for him or for us. He did it for the glory of the Father. And that through the glory of the Father, we could be redeemed.
I'll take it.
All right. Allie, closing thoughts. Can you top that? No. Well, all you really had to say was that you're the Cartesian demon that influenced him to say that, and thus it wasn't Alex but you. So I just did that for you. Studio, thank you. Great job today.
Hey, you too, Jake.
Thanks. All right. So this is the Lost Voice Radio program. If you have questions, comments, or concerns about anything we said or us in general, please email us at lostvoice@wcatradio.com, and we will see you next week. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.